Alright folks, how are we doing? It's Shabash. Welcome back to the channel. It's Orna again, and today we are talking about elements. Now elements play quite a large part, not only in the lore and the surrounding kind of thematics, but also in the gameplay. It's quite significant. So let's just fire in. We'll just start mentioning what are the actual elements in the game of Orna. And the easiest way to do this, I'm going to look in the spells tab, and there's four main basic elements. That is the fire, water, earth, and lightning. You know, these dictate the kingdoms you can join. You know, you choose your faction, and we'll come on to that later on. But after those four basic elements, you also have four sort of, let's call them secondary elements. They're a little bit more rarer. And those are holy, dark, arcane, and dragon. And then finally, there's another element which is kind of like a pseudo element, but for actual gameplay mechanics, it is treated as an element, and that is physical. So you can see here these skills here, charge for example, that says physical on it. You know, that's actually doing physical damage, and we'll talk more about why that's different to something like bleed later on. So essentially you've got the four basic elements: fire, water, earth, lightning. Then you have four secondary elements: holy, dark, arcane, and dragon. And then finally you have physical there, which kind of sits, you know, in it's more involved with like attack based builds, but we'll talk more about later on. Let's move on to the factions. So what are factions? Well, when you reach level 10, you are asked by the game to choose a faction, and I've talked about multiple times before, you know, faction dictates you can only join kingdoms in your faction. You can also spend 99 cents in the rune shop to change factions if you want to play with your mates and whatnot. I think most people are aware that, you know, to join a kingdom depends on your faction, but faction also benefits you in battle in terms of damage and also damage received. There are a little bit of reduction and increase in damage depending on your faction. I just want to point out here, yeah, if you look at the kingdom leaderboard, you can tell by the color of the badge what faction these kingdoms are a part of. We're not going to talk about what hexes are included for kingdoms at the moment, but you can see for yourself there's four different factions. A lot of people want to have kingdom options for the other factions like dark and holy, etc., but that's not currently, at least at the time of recording this video, that currently isn't an option. So let's talk about how faction affects your damage and also damage, incoming damage as well. Well, actually, you have a 25% increase in damage when you do elemental damage of the same faction you are a part of. You also take a 25% reduction in that same faction damage. So I'm an Earthen Legion, which means I take 25% less damage from any kind of earth elemental damage incoming. I take 25% less. And also when I'm doing earthen damage, I do 25% more damage than I would normally. So let's test this out on the offensive side. If I jump into a quick raid where something isn't resistant to certain types of damage, you can see I've got these two spells right down at the bottom, Tremor 6 and Spark 6. These spells have the exact same amount of power. So all going well, they would do roughly the exact same damage. So let's use Tremor 6, and you can see that's 11,767 damage there. So I think there's usually a small variance. Also the boss gets a little bit more tanky, but when you do damage. But now if we do Spark, this should be doing roughly 25% less damage, so it would be around, I don't know, just over 8k damage, something like that. 9.4, okay. So we went from 11.6 to 9.4. Let's go again. Remember, I just want to try and make sure the buffs are relatively the same. So we do 11.7 there, and he doesn't have any other buffs. Go to Spark, and we do 9.3. So, okay, I'm going to try and show reduced incoming damage depending on your faction. So if I just show you my PvP skills here, I've got Tremor 1 and Spark 1, Tremor being the same faction as myself. So if we go in the arena, I'm going to attack myself in the mirror. So Spark and Tremor should actually end up doing the same amount of damage. And so Spark doing 2,500, now Tremor 1 also doing 2,500. It actually got cast twice due to my spec being sequencer. Now, you might have seen the red damage there. We'll talk more about what color damage numbers means, but actually that was me doing 25% more damage because I'm Earthen Legion, but also as myself taking 25% less damage. That calculation cancels each other out, so ends up doing the exact same amount of damage. If I had someone nearby who was a different faction, I could test it a little bit better and make it attack me. But you know, you can't even test this on people in your kingdom, because the people in your kingdom are the same faction as you. So if we just do this again, we can see spark 2.9k damage. Now remember, my ward is going up, so I'm getting a little bit more power every turn. So this should be roughly 3k for one hit. Yeah, 2.9k, so around about there. And it showed red because now, this didn't used to happen, but it was a new change. Red damage is normally showing resisted damage, and now it also shows you taking reduced faction damage, the same element as yourself. So basically the thing to remember is you will do 25% more damage doing damage of your faction with any skill or ability, and you will take 25% less damage of your faction as well. So let's move on to equipment. So when you're in battle, when you see yellow numbers, that means your damage is not being reduced or increased in any way. Red damage usually means it's being resisted, either by 50% due to equipment resistances, which we'll talk about in a second, or any normal resistances. And if you're doing blue damage, that means the mob or the opponent has a weakness and you're actually doing double damage. But let's talk about equipment now and how these elements are affected by equipment. Okay, so you can find equipment with element on them. And the way these affect you in battle change depending on if it's a weapon or if it's any other kind of gear. So weapons we'll talk about second. Let's talk about armor first. So any kind of armor slots that have an element on them will give you resistance to that element. So for example, this Old Northern Crown, you can see it has earthly. Also, yeah, any kind of defensive equipment, and actually any kind of equipment with an element on it will have like a nice little prefix saying it's of that element. There's a few different ones. It's quite a nice touch actually. But you can go and check, and you have to see this box down here. It says earthen. That means it has the earthen element on it. Let's see if I've got anything else around here. Nothing up here. Can't actually search by element. Okay, here's one here. Legendary Scalding Plate Helmet. You can see it's got the fire badge on it, meaning it's got fire resistance on it. And actually, I think there's a 2% chance for gear to drop with an element on it. And let's have a look at other armors. What have we got? The Fey Yeti coat, of course, has water. All the Yeti coats throughout the game have water resistance. That's kind of an innate. That's an innate element. Some pieces of gear will have a certain element attached to it, and you can't change it in any way. And in fact, only weapons are able to be changed their element. You can enchant them at an alchemist or a demon forge, but any kind of armor drops, those are not guaranteed elements, and you cannot change them if they do have an element on them. So it actually makes it more rare to get elemental drops on a piece of armor, and because it gives you that resistance, which is a 50% damage reduction, taking damage from that element, that makes armor with an element on them, you know, a really nice find. So for example, these Ashen Phoenix Greaves, they have the dark element on them. You can get armor pieces with any of the 4 basic elements and also the 4 secondary elements. You can't get you can't resist physical damage, which is like the 9th element there. So some gear, for example, like Apollyon gear, the boot slot, the leg slot always has dark resistance for mage, warrior, and thief gear. The armor slot will always have, where is it? The armor slot will always have arcane resistance, and the head slot will always have holy resistance. So we've got an abyssal helmet here, holy resistance, and I don't know where my incarnate hood is. I think there's different sorting going on here, but if I show you, the realm cowl has holy resistance on it, and the incarnate hood has holy resistance on it. So there's some pieces of gear which will always drop with the same element. You know, it's just part of that gear. So as I said, if you have a piece of gear with resistance on it, that means when you're actually fighting, if you take elemental damage off that element, you'll get a pure 50% damage reduction. That damage reduction applies after penetration in the damage equation. If you don't know what the damage penetration calculation is like, you can check out my Ultimate Beginner Guide video. I go quite over it in a lot more detail in that video. Elemental armor, really nice to find. If you get ornate elemental gear pieces, that is like the holy grail. Super nice. Biggest thing to remember is you cannot change the element on armor pieces. Now, talking about weapon pieces, we actually look at something different, because you can change the element on weapons fairly easily. And we can see here at the top, I've got these weapons here. They don't have any element on them at all. When it says something like renewed or reclaimed, that means you've actually removed an element, and you can, obviously, because you can change element, you can actually remove it. Very good for attack-based builds for PvP. Looking at this Fey Crowsong, you can see I've got earthen element on it. And looking at these weapons, these staffs, I've actually got dragon element on this, and I'll explain more about why I do have that later on. And looking at a couple of other weapons which have innate elements, for example, the Fallen God the Fallen God mobs at tier 9 and 10, they have the element on the weapon. You cannot change that. This is fire coming from the Vulcan boss, and similarly for Ithra, it always has water element. You cannot physically change that. So I would talk and try and show quickly how you can change the element on weapons, and you go to an alchemist, which gives you options for enchanting. So here we go, enchantment, and let's just choose a cheap piece of gear. And so at the alchemist, you can put any of the 4 basic elements on a weapon. Costs a little bit of gold, also costs the elemental stones, fire, water, lightning. Let's just put on fire here. And now it will change the name. It will give it a nice little fiery themed prefix. There we go, Legendary Warm Gungnir. And you can also go back in, and it costs a little bit more gold now, but you can change the element, or you can remove the element. So let's just remove it to show you. And now it has another prefix saying renewed, which means it is physical, and you have reclaimed the element from it. Similarly, in the Demon Forge, we're in the same enchantment tab. And now you have 3 options: Holy, Dark, and Dragon. So there's no Arcane element option here, that's to be noted. And I'm not 100% sure why, but I think I'll come on and talk about the status effects associated with the elements at the end of the video. But I think the reason why is that Arcane is actually associated with all 4 basic elements, so it might be a little bit overpowered if you could have an Arcane weapon. That is my thought. So yeah, in the Demon Forge you can put Holy, Dark, and Dragon on your weapon. So the reason weapons are a bit different to armor pieces is that the element associated with your weapon has no impact on the defensive side of elements. If you have a fire elemental weapon and you take fire damage and you do not have fire resistance from your gear or from any skills used in your fight, you're going to take full damage. You're not going to resist that. And any elements on your weapon do not resist incoming damage whatsoever. What they do, on the other hand, is affect your outgoing damage. As you might expect, it's a weapon. So again, we've split weapons and armor, and we're going to have to split weapons again into magic damage and physical damage, or attack damage I should say, because it's quite easy to get confused between physical and attack, because some people use it to mean the same thing, where in fact, there are slight differences in this game particularly. So if you're a mage and you're doing magic damage, the elements often come from your spells, and they will always override your weapon's innate element damage. However, if you are an attack-based build, there are a number of skills that use the inherent element on your weapon. And you can tell what skills do this because they do not have an elemental tag on them. So in the skills category, basically the skills tab on the left at the top, if you see a skill that does not say physical, that means that skill is going to use the element of your weapon. If your weapon does not have an element, it will do physical damage. So that's where the physical element comes into it. And you can see there are a number of skills which actually do physical damage. Guts, lunge, perfect shot here, they will always do physical damage. And that means if you have, for example, an Ithra's blade which has water element on it, and you use lunge, it means you will always do physical damage when you use lunge. But if you use pierce, you can see pierce does not have the physical tag, so you will actually do water damage when you use pierce and you have an Ithra's blade. So a lot of the main attacking skills, for example, Dragon Vengeance, you can see they don't have any element tag, so they actually take the element of your weapon. Osmo Strike, all the main attacking skills, Spike Shield back in tier 10, Omni Strikes, Tri-Cut, quad cut, swordplay, they all use the element on your weapon. So when it comes to something like PvP, that's when you actually, if you are an attack-based build, you kind of do not want elements on your weapon, because when you're attacking, say you do something like tri-cut or later on swordplay 3 to do damage in PvP, if you have an element, then your opponent is actually able to resist that sometimes, and even classes actually have innate resistances. However, if you do not have an element on your weapon, you'll do physical damage, and currently there is no way to resist physical damage. So as an example, I'm currently using a weapon here which has the origin tag. That is a reclaimed weapon. I've put an element on it and taken it off, so that is actually has no element on it at the moment. So just want to demonstrate quickly also the fact that using a skill with an element attached to it will override your weapon's element. This is a Fallen Gaia, it's a tier 10 mob. It's immune to earthen damage. So this skill here, Terror Strike 2, is an earthen skill, so if we use that, it's immune, right? Immune to earthen damage. However, if we use a skill like Sortie, that uses the element on your weapon, and because I do not have an element on my weapon, it's going to do damage. There we go. Yellow damage is just like normal, unresisted, basically pure damage, you can call it, okay? And then you have other skills which have different elements, for example, Viper Strike and Wyvern Strikes. Both of those are dragon elemental skills. Those are actually quite useful, especially for attack characters, because generally a lot of mobs will be immune or resist to certain elements, and having a dragon attack is quite useful to overcome those elements. The difference between attack-based build and magic-based builds is that magic builds have spells which do elementless damage. They do not do physical damage or any other element. They literally do pure, true damage without any element attached to them. So in the spells tab here, all of these skills here actually do, I'm pretty sure all of these skills will actually do elementless damage, right? These cannot be resisted in any way. Typically they are less powerful because of that. Typically, I say there are a couple of strong skills in here. If you come across something like a Mighty Mimic at tier 9, or even like the Ghosts earlier on, which are immune to certain damage, they are immune to a lot of elements, you can use something like Drain, Bolt, even Bolt 1. It's a good skill early on because it's elementless damage. It cannot be resisted. Now, I also want to touch on Adornments, because a lot of people will ask, if I put this Adornment which has an elemental tag on it, will that make my weapon or will that make my armor piece that have that element? And the answer is no. I think the most common one is these Arcana jewels. If we have a look here, you can see it says Arcane on them, and you can understand why it's a little bit confusing. But if you put this in your weapon, it will not make your weapon have the Arcane element, okay? It will cause these other status effects, or help to cause them, but it will not give you the Arcane element on your weapon. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's any jewels, any adornments which have elements associated with them that you put in your armor. Because, you know, armor is the big one, where if you can get easy resistances just by putting a jewel in them, everybody would do it. But that's not the case, okay? So you can't. Let's just, for the sake of argument, let's pretend this emerald pinion, or it had an earthen element attached to it. If I put this in my armor, it would not give me earthen resistance on my armor piece, because assumingly there would be different adornments with different elements attached to them, and then you can just put one of every adornment in like your head slot, and suddenly you have a head slot which is resistant to all 8 elements, plus maybe there's a physical one in the end as well, right? So you cannot change the element of your gear by adornments. So we've talked about how elements affect your armor and your weapons, and also I want to talk about how using the skills of a certain element will always override the element on your weapon. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, if you are a magic based user, you're almost always going to be using skills which have an element attached, and you're not really going to be worried about the element on your weapon at all, unless you are doing an attack-based build with a magic class, but that's not something we can go into here. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be doing, if you're a mage, you're not going to be using bleed as your main damaging skill, right? You're going to be using something like bolt, or you're going to be using tremor if you're Earthen Legion. If you're in Stormforce, you want to be using spark, spark 2, multi-spark, getting that extra 25% damage. Okay, and that's the other thing. So using the skill will always override elements on your weapon. And I was going to talk about this at the end of the video, but I think it would be good to talk about it now, is status afflictions associated with your weapon, and also statuses associated with the elemental damage you're doing, either through skills or with your weapon. Because this can get a little bit confusing, especially from the magic point of view, because if I show you some magic stuff here, and again I'll explain why I have a dragon element on my staffs here, is if I go to my main staff, so you see I have the dragon element on my staff here. Now there's status afflictions which are associated with the elements, and doing any kind of damage with that element will have a chance to apply that status effect to your opponent during battle if you do damage with it. Now, in the case of doing magic damage, if I do magic damage with any kind of... Actually, this also applies to attack-based damage, by the way. If you have an element on your weapon and you do damage of another element because of a skill, you actually also have the opportunity to proc the status effect associated with your weapon element. Okay, so the status effect associated with dragon damage is Blight. Now, I still have the chance to cause Blight on my opponent if I use an ice spell. If I use Glacier, I can actually apply Frozen due to the spell element, which is ice, and I can also apply Blight, which is the status effect associated with dragon, which I get from my weapon. So, especially in the case of magic users, it's a very good idea to put a nice for your opponent element on your staff. And I like having dragon element. And I want to show you my other weapon. Here we go. So this is a nice tier 10 weapon. It has a lot of adornment slots, and I've put dragon on it, which gives a chance to proc Blight on my enemy. And then I've stuffed all these mushrooms in it, which also have the chance to proc Blight on my enemy. So I've increased my chance to proc Blight on my enemy quite significantly. So let me try and show you this in action. Make sure I currently do not have Blight immunity on. Now, I do believe you have to do at least some damage on your enemy to proc status effects. So actually, I did it to myself. You see, I used Ultima on myself, and I procced Blight on myself there. I mean, it was the defensive AI, but it's still my character proccing Blight. We've got a second chance. So still we're not proccing Blight at all. I think a better thing to do would be to use Transference, which is an elementalist skill. Here we go, and this would be the best way to show it off. So I will probably skip until I actually proc this. Okay, keep going. Okay, boom, we got it here. I use Transference, and you can see in the battle log we cause Blight on the enemy. That's coming from either the element on my weapon, which is dragon, or the 9 or so mushrooms which I've used to proc Blight. So I really want to increase my chance to apply that status effect on my enemy. And it's the exact same thing it's actually the exact same thing for attack-based builds, right? If I go on my Realm Shifter here, now imagine I was using an Ithra's Blade, which has the water effect on it. If we go Ithra, And actually, while I'm dual wielding, it'd be good to point out for attack-based builds, when you're using a skill which uses the element on your weapon, it only takes into account the element on your main hand on the left side. So if I had my Aethric Blade on my offhand slot, I would be doing pure physical damage. I wouldn't be doing water damage with skills which use element for my weapon. That's quite a new thing in the game now that dual wielding is here. So I'm just trying to think what's the best way to show this. If I use, I guess, Sortie. Yeah, okay, Sortie. I'm actually wearing, I think, the Fayeti coat, right, which has that water element on it. And we are doing resisted damage because Sortie takes the element from my weapon. And Yokai comes in with the frozen proc there. And you can actually see it the other way as well. The AI attacking, which uses the element from my main hand, and that I resisted it. Now if we use if we use Perfect Shot is a physical skill, and that should not be resisted at all. And there you go. Yellow damage means it's not resisted. I'll just quickly show you the gear here. The Fayeti coat. The Fayeti coat has water resistance, as you should be aware of by now. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know the difference between proc rates from the element on your weapon compared to Adornments, for example. I just know that they do proc differently, and if you want to try and proc a status effect on your opponent, it's better to stack as many Adornments as you can in there. So that's why the Arisen Caledanda and the Caledanda at tier 9 are so good, because you have so many slots that you can stick in Arcana Jewels or the spores from Naganin. So yeah, I think that's a good point to move on to, is monster and other enemies also have elements associated with them. Now monsters can have resistances, they can have weaknesses, and they can have immunities. So the best way to see that is within the codex, actually, because that's coming purely from the game files itself. So you can see here Baylor Assassin is weak to arcane damage. Weaknesses mean you will take double damage from that element. So if we were to go and hit that Baylor Assassin with arcane and then use the exact same powered skill of a different element, the arcane should do twice as much damage than the other skill. If we go into, I'm trying to find, Baylor Gateway is a good one. You see it has weaknesses, immunities, and resistances. And of course, immunities mean you're not going to do any damage with those elements whatsoever. Resistances, again, you will do 50% damage doing damage with those elements. Codex entries are the best way to check certain enemy types, what they're resistant to. Naganin, and that's a good point actually. A lot of the event raid bosses will have particular resistances and immunities associated with them. It's actually, immune to water and lightning, resist to earth, so, Stormforce and Frozen Guard kind of get a bad deal there. Trying to see a lot of the normal kingdom raids like King Arthas, Apollyon, the Morrigan. The Morrigan has three resistances there: Dark, Holy, and Dragon. Where's Apollyon? Apollyon not resistant to anything. So ideally, if you want to know what elements monsters are associated with, you want to check a completed codex entry, and a good way to do that is by utilizing bots or going on a site that has a completed list of codex entries. And selfless plug here for the Orna Legends website. We've got a full list of completed entries for codex, and you can see here, for example, the Goblin. You can go and check what resistance is or whatever associated elements are attached to it. Huge thanks to File Not Found for submitting something like 390 completed entries, something absolutely ridiculous. Huge effort to complete the codex. We also had a couple of other people chip in for missing entries, so huge thanks to everybody who's helped out there. Also big thanks to Roars for implementing the completed codex entry feature into Roarbot, which is a bot you can use on Discord, and it's actually really good. Let's have a quick look. If you don't have Roarbot in your Kingdom server, for example, send me a message and I can get you an invite. But basically, Roarbot, you can see you have the command here, exclamation mark codex, and that will come up with the completed codex entry for that mob. If we just go, I don't know, let's pick, what's my favorite monster of the moment? Bandit Lord. Let's go with Bandit Lord. Yeah. Oh, actually you have to put the command in, right? Codex Bandit Lord. And that will bring up the completed codex entry for that mob or monster. And yeah, pretty easy to use. That's included in Roarbot. Again, if you don't have Roarbot in your Kingdom server and you want to have it, let me know and I'll send you an invite link. Also, please let me know if you preferred this video layout, portrait mode on mobile. I think it should work a little bit better. But yeah, let me know in the comments below. Really thanks for watching. I hope this helped. If you've got, again, any further questions, please just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or join the Orna Legends Discord. Link to that in the description below, and I should be able to help you a bit more quicker and we can discuss in more detail. Otherwise, yeah, I'm Shabash. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Ciao.